Hello, welcome back to the What Problem Are You Solving podcast, where we believe that finding out what problem you're solving turns into what pays. We're two lean startup coaches that have a passion for quickly delivering value before you spend too much. We're on a new
That's right.
platform here, so let's introduce everybody. My name is John Ruark, and I am a lean startup coach in the DC metro area. And with me, as always, is Ty Smith.
Ty Smith, how you doing? How you doing, John?
I'm doing great, Ty. How are you?
I can't complain whatsoever. And guess what, John? We actually have a guest with us tonight.
We do.
Yeah,
Who's our
really.
special guest for tonight?
Our special guest tonight. Oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first guest in a series of having conversations that's just beyond us. And our first guest tonight is Adam Burke. And Adam, interestingly enough, his little byline is, by the way, what problem are you solving? Big old question mark. And we find that that's important. It's intriguing. We've actually worked with Adam before. And so we thought, what would happen if we actually invited some other lean startup professionals? And so Adam's been doing a lot of work all over the place. He's worked with large organizations. He's worked with small organizations. Right now, he's in Detroit doing some work in Detroit. He's worked not only like small and large, he's actually worked all over the world in Chile, he's worked in Ramallah, he's worked in Istanbul, he's worked with some of the leading companies out there, AOL, ESPN, Amex, American Express. So he's done a lot of stuff. And what he really likes to do, what he's passionate about is like lean startup, customer development, testing. Whenever we had an opportunity to work with Adam, he's always like, can we test it? You can see it in his face. It's like, yeah, his eyes light up. He's like, oh, so what can we do with that? And so welcome, Adam. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Outstanding.
Awesome.
So, Adam, you know that we have this podcast of What Pays. And oh, by the way, that, ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't me. John and I worked together, and he said, check this out. And he wrote it on the board. I was like, what pays? He's like, ah. And what was that, John?
Well, if you spell it out, it's what problem are you solving? And when you figure out what problem you're solving, you actually will get something that pays. So, it's catchy, but it's become a catchphrase of Ty's. And when we had the first pleasure of meeting with Adam, when he did his short little introduction, we said, "Well, what's kind of your what's your catchphrase? What's your little short bio?" And right out of the bat, what did you say, Adam?
What problem are you solving?
Just like that. It sounded just like that.
Did we just become best friends? Awesome.
So, Adam, why is that part of who you are? That as a lean startup guy, why is that so important for you as central to your kind of coaching identity?
Well, I'd like to think it's because of how smart I am and how much I get it. But the truth is, it started out on a startup where I was trying to, all day I was trying to think of the acronym for I wasn't solving a problem. So I guess it was IW, what doesn't, so I guess it's really what doesn't pay is really what it came down to. And so what didn't pay at the time was not understanding the problem I was solving. So I was on the startup side of this. I never tried to be a consultant. I don't mind being a coach, but I never tried to be a consultant on purpose. So I did start this on the entrepreneur side. I called Naybaro a sharing economy company before a lot of the sharing economy companies. Another word for being too early is being wrong. And we had a platform for sharing drills and books when they were still made out of paper and, household items in apartment buildings in New York City. And which, like I'm sure we'll get into here, we dove right into the solution, started building stuff. And I think we were 5 years in before my co-founder and I looked at each other and said, literally, what problem are we solving?
Wow, 5 years in.
Oh, yeah. This was one of the classic, entrepreneurs are just supposed to be more passionate and more bigger risk takers and just ahead of their time area. I was at the end of believing all that stuff, but I was still there. And it didn't take more than a month after asking ourselves, and I think, you know, lean startup had something to do with it at the time. So there were a bunch of things that coalesced, not to try to get fancy in the dictionary, but yeah, it wasn't. I think lean startup may have led us. I'm not sure if what problem you're solving led to lean startup, or if lean startup led to a problem you're solving, but it was all happening right around the same time. And yeah, within a month, we sort of asked ourselves what problem we're solving and found out that we were solving 10 problems at once, and we weren't really solving any of them. And even the ones that we could articulate weren't actual problems that people needed solved. And we'll get into that, I'm assuming, a little bit later. And then the flip side of my lean startup coin quickly ran an experiment with an actual metric, you know, within a month. So it was like, you know, it wasn't just listings on our, oh, we have $1 million worth of stuff on in our directory that nobody gives a, you know, I'm keeping it PG, so nobody cares about. And when we pushed ourselves to say, well, what's the really important metric? The important metric is liquidity. You know, is anyone actually borrowing anything? Are people transacting on the site? And so instead of 1,000 listings, could we do one? You know, could we do one transaction? I think we did one, but I think the real metric was like, could we do 5 or 6 in a month? And we didn't. And I won't say we packed it up after one experiment, and I don't encourage new founders to do that. But after trying for 5 years, sort of failing to raise money, even after success that we had in the media, and, you know, users emailing us how we're saving their lives and saving the world. And I'm like, oh, did you use this? You know, let's look at the account. Oh, they haven't used it either. Like, what the heck is going on here? So yeah, I could, you know, we only have a half an hour. I could talk about the startup side of this all day, but, you know, a lot of lessons learned, like Mr. Eric Ries's blog, lessons learned. But yeah, it came down to other things as well. But the main thing, and the thing that still stays with me as a coach, why I'm so passionate about it when I flip it around on people, and I guess also why I'm justified in asking. You know, I'm not just some, you know, they say I don't come down to your house and knock the license plates out of your hand when you're at your job. Like, I feel like I'm somewhat entitled to ask that question, and I'm not just kind of some obnoxious consultant saying, you know, what problem are you solving? So,
yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the part of experimentation. That's one thing that we've talked about in a previous episode. But, you know, if you really don't know what problem you're trying to solve, even experimentation can be wasted energy, wasted work, right? Because you could be testing the wrong thing. And so you could put a lot of energy even into what you think is a good experiment. And by the way, you can run the experiment successfully and still not get good data. You're going to get data maybe about the experiment, but not about really what's the prima facie question you should be asking is, what is the specific problem we're trying to solve through these tests. So I'm glad you talked about, you know, running these experiments to validate or invalidate what were your critical parts of your assumptions of your startup. And so say a little bit more about the power of experiments to validate the problem you're solving.
So it's interesting because experiments sometimes also then just get conflated back to the solution and to some metrics. So I'm gonna turn it back to you for a second, but the experiments, it's interesting. Experiments to understand the problem are usually just customer discovery. So you see it sliced in a lot of different ways. Like, do you do customer, do you do problem interviews, do you do ethnographic research, for another fancy word, you know, until you validate the problem and then you start experimenting. I like to think that, you know, customer discovery and stakeholders discovery, like it's not just this customer word, all the humans you interact with, you should be understanding their motivations, what's driving them, who you're competing against. Usually that's not another startup or another organization. It's usually their apathy, and they just don't care, their irrationality. I was thinking about that. I knew I had to have some, even though I know this stuff pretty well, I wanted to make sure I had a couple of elevator pitch lines. And I think that's probably the one, you know, I think I think that, understanding the problem you're solving just anchors you in sort of everything. I don't know.
Well, I got a question for you, Adam. So you said that in your experience, what happened was that you had, after 5 years, you had 10 things. You're like, oh my God. How did you go about the process? Could you talk to us about the process of ranking those so you got to that thing that was your epiphany, another SAT word, your epiphany that said, oh, if we don't solve this, we're screwed. What was that process like? Not just the technical pieces, but what was it like kind of emotionally as you as a founder to go through that?
So I'll give a little bit of a cop-out answer on this one, and then I'll stop giving cop-out answers. I feel like it's the two in a row. There was no process. We had process in trying different things because nothing was working. So we had process. We definitely had a process in changing the customer. So we were sophisticated enough to take our solution. We knew we wanted to be, hence the word borrow. So we wouldn't even. We'll get to the pivot word in a second, but we wouldn't even entertain the idea of renting because borrow was in the URL, which was just that I will tell founders not do that. But we were good enough that we knew, that in the idea of borrowing, we sort of had our solution. We ignored the problem, but we were a little bit good about understanding the customer. So it was like, okay, we think it belongs in cities because of proximity and shipping will be easy and there's density. But then we would just kind of go out, no real liquidity. And so college students are broke, so they want to share. So I guess implicit in the change of customer was maybe a little bit better than we thought, that we were assuming a new problem, college students are broke, so they need to borrow stuff. But it was never as structured. It was, we weren't basing the new thing on previous learnings. We were just we were trying new stuff.
Yeah, just kind of shots in the dark.
Yeah. So there was no structure. And then, to be completely honest, I think the structure came after going to our first Lean Startup meetup. I mean, it was literally night and day. It wasn't something we did some stuff right. But as far as the structure, as far as what led us to experimentation and to the problem we're solving, I literally think I think we were at the first Lean Startup meetup in New York. And it was that. I think some of the other stuff we were doing, we had spreadsheet, we had all of our other startup stuff, a lot of the vanity stuff, a lot of the stuff you still see today. And I don't think we have time to get into all. We had a spreadsheet for what we were going to name our site, and we had all of our design stuff, and we had our Asana backlog, and we had everything. I want to stay focused on the positive stuff and not go down memory lane. I still see some of those documents popping up, and they were Google Docs, they were spreadsheets, they were just ideas, but they were all inside of our own heads. So, some of it we were good. I remember we set up like a garage sale, so to speak, in the lobby of someone's building. So doing things that didn't scale, doing things. So we kind of had some of the good, so that kind of equates to the concierge MVP, but we weren't doing it on purpose, and we didn't really know what we were doing. But to give us a little bit of credit, like we were pivoting in terms of we were doing customer segment pivots, but we didn't really know, and it wasn't based on learnings. So it wasn't really a pivot. It was just kind of trying stuff. We were doing things that didn't scale, but we weren't really doing it on purpose, and we weren't testing a specific variable. We were doing some things right, but most of the things wrong. And it wasn't rooted in the problem until the end.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is a lot of it was you were trying to find problem solution fit, but you kept iterating on different things that really didn't lead you down an educated path. You were just trying, tweaking 2 or 3 knobs at a time, and then wondering why the machine wasn't getting, the garbage in, garbage out. And I'm glad you, you talked about the later structure. What would you have gone back and told your earlier self, based off of this epiphany that you had at the first Lean Startup conference or meetup? What would you go back to the first year of your startup and do differently?
We would have taught not just the experimentation part, but we would have talked to more people about I mean, literally the technique that we teach now. Not, hey, do you want to be able to share stuff? But historical example. Tell me the last time you needed to borrow something. What did you do? How did it get filled? Like literally that. That's what I would have done. That's literally what I would have done.
Really,
and I still do it now. You know, to the customer, the user, you know, we would have interviewed, you know, what one of our hypotheses were that, you know, the door person would facilitate the exchange, you know, and we met with apartment buildings, but we were selling that, you know, if we would have listened to the apartment building, we were ahead of the game. Then, you know, software came out for managing apartment buildings that we could, you know, maybe we chose not, maybe we wouldn't have wanted to be in the software or in the, you know, the apartment management software business. But multi-million-dollar businesses did come out of these kind of things. And we were talking to, you know, the heads of big department buildings, but we were selling, you know, we were selling them our solution. And so the one thing, it's not just this customer. I keep going back to stakeholders, everyone involved, you know, if we would have listened more, it's okay to be passionate. Obviously, the solution is the entrepreneur's job at some point. But if we would have listened more, and of course you can't go, you know, you're not going to get it right the first time. And maybe some, you know, we did have a vision, right? So we didn't just want to be in the, you know, in the apartment building business. We wanted to facilitate the exchange of stuff. We wanted to reduce waste. We wanted to bring communities together, but we could have done it, you know, we could have explored renting sooner. We could have explored storage soon. You know, there were things that we could have done, for different stakeholders. If you know, well, we should count how many times we say, what problem are you solving? But if we listened and asked questions without pushing and selling, it's important. It's an important characteristic for entrepreneurs who want to scale. And I get why we have the instinct to sell. And I'm not suggesting that people go soft and, you know, not try to sell and not be aggressive, but you need to time it right. You need to get the order right. Otherwise, selling nothing. You know, you're literally selling nothing.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Just so you know, between the two of us, that is John and I, John is he calls himself a recovering engineer. And so he is what's the knobs? What does the data tell you? And on my side, I mean, historically, I grew up as doing therapy with kids. And so I'm concerned about how people experience things. And as I listen to you talk and you say, this is what historically I would have done differently, the question that John just asked you, I'm like, God, in your coaching experience, when you try to get people to get to what problem are they solving, kind of back away from their solution, how do you see them and how do you experience them when they get to the realization like, oh crap, I've been selling a solution that nobody wants? Is it embarrassed? Is it reticent? Another SAT word. Are they kind of freaked out? Do they run? Do they say, no, I know what I'm doing? What's that like for your typical entrepreneur when they get to that point of 5 years in and they still haven't reached the success that they had, and maybe why they can't pivot?
It depends. So it's a complicated, like you said, there's a lot of different types of entrepreneurs, and there's a spectrum on how far in they are. So we all know about the sort of sunk cost bias, and the further you're in, there's no question. It doesn't matter how mature you are, it doesn't matter how smart you are. There's a lot of things in entrepreneurship that are still a bit of an art, not a science, and we all want to believe in the magic, and most of that is still true. But, you know, there's either a one-on-one, whatever the plot graph is, that one-to-one relationship. The further in you are, the harder it is to undo. So I don't want to say you're more embarrassed, but you're definitely more stubborn. You're definitely less likely to change. You're definitely more committed. You're pot committed, to use a poker term. So it depends. I mean, nowadays, you know, my job is to get people earlier. You know, so you go to we have to now have intentionality about what we're teaching and being, you know, who are our early adopters. And so, you know, someone who's 5 years in and who is the me, I might, as a favor, kind of say, hey, you know, you should really look at it this way, or go read this book, or, you know, forget everything, spend 1 week kind of going back and talking to your customers. But the truth is, you got to get them early, and it's better when someone first has an idea. That's why I kind of convince I have not to promote my little Mill Val Chow, but it's like when you first have an idea, go out and talk to me. The very first thing you should do is go talk to 100 customers in 50 days. Maybe not everyone wants to go talk to 10 customers that first week. Don't buy a domain name, like literally. Like I remember the first thing I did, buy a domain name, try to patent something, go hire a technical co-founder, have calls with my investment banker friends like, oh, no one's ever thought of this one. You're not going to believe my idea to share things with your neighbor. What am I, crazy? Like, are you serious? Of course, no one's ever had the idea to share something with their neighbor. It's ridiculous. But yeah, the very first thing is go talk to 10 people and don't mention your solution. That is as basic as I've been able to get it. You don't have to be an expert in ethnographic research. You don't have to be a psychologist or you don't have to learn any of that. You don't have to be a lean startup expert, an agile expert, a buzzword expert. Go talk to 10 people about their day or about their last month without mentioning your solution in the context of the problem.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. If I can jump in, I'm glad you mentioned that because I know, I can speak for some of the teams that Ty and I have worked with at one of our government customers. Actually, multiple teams that we've worked with. The ones who were most hard set on their solution, when we made them step back from their solution and just do like you said, the straight up, interviews without talking about your solution at all, stepping back and understanding, ask the questions about context instead of trying to solve it. Most of the ones who were, solution bent really had the biggest turnaround, the biggest epiphanies when they stopped and listened. They knew they were right from the beginning, and then when they stopped and listened, they said, well, we weren't right about that. And maybe because of what we've heard, we've got this new context that maybe the solution can change to fit this new problem, because we actually know, I like to say, when you have a great idea, that's a solution with a data point of 1 yourself, right? And so now when you talk to someone else, you at least have additional data points that are not yours to get rid of confirmation bias, to get rid of, and actually to build a statistical analysis. Again, that's the left brain engineer part of me coming in. When you interview more people other than yourself, and you have a close to a more diverse set that you are interviewing, when the higher the n number in your statistics, the greater the repeatability of the experiment, and therefore the greater the finding the true problem that you're trying to solve. So yeah, that's been our experience, that the teams that have been bent most on solutions, when you force them to step away, just temporarily say it's not going to hurt, you can come right back, but you've got to interview 10 people a week or whatever, and they come back around going, wow, this was life-changing.
One of the things that I'd like to hear from you, Adam, is you and I and John have been working with a mission-focused customer, right? That's how we met. After that, I guess the first time I met you was in New York at a Lean Startup Conference, and then you were working with Pearson, and so we've now moved on. We're in a mission-focused. How do you do this Lean Startup thing, or how are you finding it working in an organization that is about mission, that's not about profit margin, and making it so that they can, if they need to pivot, how they ask these questions like what problem you're solving? Because our experience has been that they immediately throw up, well, we have this mission to achieve. What's been your experience around utilizing these same principles that you've been working with for years and going into a space where people they can't, they'll say things like, we're not a business because we don't sell anything. wait. Do people find value in what you do? Yeah, well, guess what, baby? You got a business. What is the profit loss is different. So how do you go about helping them?
I think it's, I think a lot of it's the same. I love it and listen into some of the best. And so you talk about the, feasibility, desirability, and viability. So viability in terms of the, the cost of a customer versus the lifetime value of it needs the math just needs to work. I think you can ignore that. I personally think that these kind of organizations do need to find ways of being sustainable, and it could be a different model. But at some point, I do think that there's going to need to be a sustainability component. So maybe you just put the viability part on hold for a second. But it's interesting. In the beginning, when I was kind of imaged to making this jump, I was like, well, the problem is implicit, and now we can kind of move to the feasibility part of it. And I still think to some extent that's true. And you need to run more short-term experiments, getting data that people are doing what you expected them to do. There's a lot of interesting examples, and I'll fumble some of them now. So maybe we'll put in the notes or in the, but it's like, pills that are supposed to eradicate disease instantly, but nobody takes the pill because they're, or something that's supposed to eliminate malaria, but the net itself wasn't hung properly because really went out. And this is where sort of ethnographic reason, not to keep throwing around a fancy word, but this is where going and seeing how people actually behave and what assumptions you're making. So I think the assumptions part of Lean Startup, and we didn't cover that as much, but I think in these kind of situations, the assumptions you're making about human beings, you be like, and this goes for startups and big orgs too, but especially, when there's something bigger than just a business out there, it's easy to make assumptions. Well, of course, I'm doing good for the world, so my assumptions are more likely to be true, which is a ridiculous notion on the face, but it's I can still see how people make that kind of jump. So, and I also think, in the beginning, my assumption was that you didn't really need to revalidate the problem, but you do, because it's not just solving for homelessness or solving for the environment. Like, you have to ask why. And the second you start understanding the why, you do start to see that there are actually specific problems that are causing certain, and so if you combine your assumptions with problems, with investigating the human beings that are, affecting it, and then going back to what I was saying before about multiple stakeholders, you have to usually align more, because the business model is all funky. You're making one person, there's a beneficiary, there's a donor, there's, a participant, you still have to understand why. You can't just guess at it. You have to get it right. Your cycles have to be shorter. Your assumptions have to be spot on. But again, it goes not just to your mission, but like, what is the specific problem? It's like, oh, not that I don't have a job. It's like, I don't have a suit to wear, So then there was a startup that gave, people, clean clothes to wear, So when you understand the problem, the solution is obvious, and it's almost too easy. And entrepreneurs almost resist that in a weird way. And I do things the hard way a lot of times too. So I get it. But it's the same thing. I think you pull out the viability part, you make sure the feasibility part in terms of impact is reasonable, and your cycles are shorter than 3 years. Maybe you're not running classic MVPs every week, but the impact part is the feasibility part, and then that needs to be tested, week, monthly, quarterly, faster. And then in the desirability, what people say versus what they do. It's not just like, do you want to cure this disease? Do you want to, do you want to end climate change? Like, yeah, you're gonna get answers. What people say and what they do is different, which is also why experimentation is so important. So you really do have to, especially in this case, because people are even more likely to say yes and not do it, and you watch people with good intentions, but and this happens to the beneficiary too, which also gets into a sensitive conversation, which I don't know that we're ready to have right now, but even people don't always act in their own best interest, which I'll leave to like Dan Ariely and the Freakonomics guys right now. But I can at least tell you that it's a fact, why it is, and if I'm the one that's in a position to to talk about or not is besides the point. But it is true. People don't always act in their own best interest. They are not always rational. There are competing motivations, and the way you solve for, not to kind of boil that down to a physics problem. I cheated on some of the other episodes, but like it's you have to observe the people, you have to understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you have to run short cycles to see if what you're trying to accomplish is at least somewhat related to the outcome. And so then you go back and solve the garbage in, garbage out problem. I think 95% of it is the same.
Yep, I would agree. So I think we're coming close to the end. So Ty, I'll hand it back to you for your final thoughts on the topic. Any last words you want to put out there?
So I really appreciate you, Adam, having taken the time after flying in and sleepless nights and new baby and new move to take the time to sit down and talk with John and I. I know this has been a long time coming, so I really appreciate it. But one of the things that was for me really, really interesting, the very last thing is how simple this is, but yet we make it complex. Right, the human irrationality that you pointed out with Dan and Dan Ariely, the predictable irrationality, and all the Freakonomics folks, and why people do the things that they do. I find it to be fascinating, and I think that you've highlighted it, that we almost look for, it can't be that easy, right? It must be harder than that, when it really isn't. I know we all find with these large organizations, at least in the mission side of government, they have to have big, big projects that ultimately fail, but they beat up small projects that are built to test whether or not we're even going in the right direction. And so I want to thank you for highlighting that. That's a really, really important piece for the What Pays podcast. And so I know John's going to close out, but I can say from John and I appreciate you taking the time, and I know we'll be seeing each other soon. Thanks, man.
All right. Adam, any last words you want to get in?
I appreciate you. It's simple, but it's not easy. This is why we're all here. And I've learned, not to have jealousy in life, but I am jealous that I can't, to this day, I cannot believe that I didn't see the what pays and what problem are you solving. So I'll throw the credit back to the two. I can't believe I'm the king of dad jokes. I'm the king of puns. I'm a jokester at heart. The riddles are what keep me going in life. The puzzles, and it keeps me up at night. Not the baby is not what keeps me up at night. It's the fact that I didn't see what pays and what problem are you solving.
Yes, trademark pending. Yes, of course. All right. Well, thanks, Adam. Thanks, Ty. Yeah. Last thought for me. Again, it was life-changing for me as being in Adam's shoes at a smaller scale, trying to do side hustles. I'm a big fan of everyone having kind of, in 2019 and beyond, with the way the economy is, that everyone should have a side hustle. And if you're going to do a side hustle, don't burn yourself out. Run these cheap and quick experiments so that way you really figure out what problem you're solving first. It makes everything else easier. It eliminates the waste. It eliminates the cognitive waste, the stress of, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. And as Adam talked about tonight, just running lots of stuff without understanding why, can still be a lot of cognitive load. And so again, thank you for telling your story. Maybe we'll have you back on at another time, and I wish we could probably talk for another hour or two about the topic because it is something that the three of us share as a common passion. But again, thanks again, Ty. Thanks again, Adam. And that's it for this week's What Pays podcast. And remember, life's too short to waste time, effort, and money figuring out what to build next. Figure out what pays. That's it.
Good night, guys.
Good night.